Most people believe high blood pressure announces itself. A pounding headache, blurred vision, that unmistakable feeling that something is wrong. So when you feel fine, genuinely, completely fine, you assume you're safe. That assumption has cost people their lives. I'm Dr. Alex Thompson, and in over 2 decades of cardiovascular medicine, I've sat across from families trying to understand how someone they loved, someone who was laughing at dinner 3 nights earlier, someone who drove themselves to a grandchild's recital just last weekend, could suffer a massive stroke without a single warning sign. No dizziness, no chest tightness, nothing. Here's what those families didn't know, and what most physicians never explain clearly enough. High blood pressure doesn't operate on your schedule. It doesn't wait until you feel something. It works quietly, methodically, in the background, and it does its most dangerous work while you sleep. After 60, your cardiovascular system changes in ways that make this silence even more deceptive. Arteries stiffen. The nervous system loses its nighttime rhythm. And for millions of older adults, blood pressure doesn't drop during sleep the way it's supposed to. It surges. You wake up tired, a little foggy. You chalk it up to poor sleep, to age, to just one of those mornings. But something else entirely may be happening inside your arteries while you rest. That's precisely what we're covering today, not the blood pressure your doctor measures in 30 seconds during an office visit, but what's happening during the other 23 hours and 59 minutes of your day, especially the hours you spend unconscious and unaware. This is the conversation most checkups never have. Let me tell you exactly where the system breaks down. Once a year, maybe twice if your doctor is thorough, a nurse wraps a cuff around your arm. The reading takes roughly 30 seconds. You're sitting in a climate-controlled room, slightly anxious, possibly having just rushed through traffic to make your appointment on time. That number gets recorded. And for most physicians, that single data point becomes the entire foundation of your cardiovascular treatment plan. 30 seconds out of 86,400 seconds in a day. Think about what that means. The other 86,370 seconds while you're cooking, commuting, arguing, grieving, celebrating, and most critically, sleeping. Nobody is watching. And sleep is exactly where the real story lives. Under healthy conditions, your body does something elegant every night. As you drift into deep sleep, your blood pressure falls typically 10 to 20% below your daytime levels. Physicians call this the dipping pattern, and it is not a passive process. It is your cardiovascular system executing its nightly maintenance protocol. Your heart muscle repairs microscopic stress damage. Your arterial walls recover their flexibility. Your kidneys filter and recalibrate. Your entire vascular infrastructure uses those quiet nighttime hours to do the restoration work it simply cannot perform during the demands of the day. That pressure drop isn't a bonus. It's a biological requirement. Now here's where age changes everything. After 60, your arteries gradually lose the elasticity they maintained effortlessly in your 40s. The smooth muscle lining your blood vessel walls stiffens, and your autonomic nervous system, the deeply internal system responsible for orchestrating that nightly pressure decline, begins losing precision. The signals it sends become inconsistent. The timing drifts. The rhythm that your cardiovascular system depended on for decades starts to falter in ways you cannot feel and would never notice. For more than half of adults over 65, the dipping pattern doesn't just weaken, it disappears entirely. Pressure that should be falling is instead holding steady or climbing higher than it was during the day. Night after night, while you sleep peacefully and completely unaware, your heart is working against resistance. It was never designed to sustain for hours at a time. You wake up with that familiar heaviness, the foggy slowness that takes an hour to shake. You tell yourself it's just age, that you didn't sleep deeply enough, that you need better pillows or an earlier bedtime. But the fatigue you're feeling may not be about sleep quality at all. It may be the quiet aftermath of a cardiovascular system that spent 8 hours under pressure it never had the chance to release. Your doctor's 3-0-second reading will never show you that. It was never designed to. It looks at one still frame from a film that runs all night long, and the most critical scenes happen after the lights go out. I want to walk you through a case that changed how I think about blood pressure monitoring entirely. A 6-7-year old man comes into my office for a routine follow-up. Healthy weight, non-smoker, takes his medication faithfully every morning. We check his pressure, 118/76. Textbook, The kind of number that makes a physician nod with quiet satisfaction and schedule the next visit for 6 months out. But something about his fatigue pattern bothered me, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. So I sent him home with a 2-4-hour ambulatory monitor instead. What that device recorded overnight stopped me cold. At 11:15 p.m., he falls asleep. Pressure is normal. By 1:30 inches the morning while he is lying completely still, eyes closed, entirely unconscious. His blood pressure reads 170, 1/108. That is not a mild overnight fluctuation. That is a hypertensive crisis unfolding in complete silence, inside a man who felt fine, whose office visit looked perfect, who had absolutely no idea anything was wrong. So how does this happen? There are 3 distinct mechanisms, and after 60, all 3 can operate simultaneously. The first is what I call the coverage gap. His medication was taken at 7 a.m. Blood pressure drugs don't maintain uniform potency across 24 hours. By midnight, the protective window has narrowed significantly, the hours between 1 and 4 a.m. Precisely when cardiovascular events peak statistically are the hours his medication covers least effectively. The second mechanism is hormonal dysregulation. In a healthy sleep cycle, cortisol and adrenaline follow a predictable descent through the night. In many adults over 60, that descent breaks down. Instead of falling, stress hormones fluctuate unpredictably, and when they spike at 2 a.m., blood pressure follows immediately. There is no conscious experience of this, no racing heart you'd notice. Just chemistry, quietly misfiring in the dark. The third mechanism is sleep fragmentation. Most older adults experience micro-awakenings throughout the night, brief interruptions in sleep so short they leave no memory. But each one triggers a sympathetic nervous system response. A small surge of adrenaline, a corresponding spike in pressure. Multiply that across dozens of micro-awakenings per night, and you have a cardiovascular system that never truly rests. Each of these 3 mechanisms is damaging in isolation. Together, they compound, and the damage they create doesn't announce itself. It accumulates with extraordinary patience inside the walls of the coronary arteries, in the delicate microvasculature of the kidneys, in the fragile tissue at the back of the eyes. Year after year, the body absorbs the insult quietly, compensating with a biological resilience that can seem, from the outside, like perfect health, until the compensation finally reaches its limit, and by then, the window for prevention has often already closed. In cardiovascular medicine, we have a specific clinical term for people whose blood pressure fails to decline during sleep. We call them non-dippers. And when I share the prevalence data with patients, the reaction is almost always the same: disbelief, followed by a long pause. More than half of adults over 65 are non-dippers, not a fringe population, not a rare physiological anomaly that affects a small, identifiable subset of high-risk patients. The majority. If you are in a room with 10 people over 65, statistically, more than 5 of them are carrying a significant cardiovascular liability that their last doctor's visit did not detect, and almost certainly never will, under standard monitoring protocols. Now let's talk about what that liability actually costs. Non-dippers carry a cardiovascular mortality risk 3 times higher than people whose pressure dips normally, even when their daytime readings are identical. Same numbers on the office chart, same medication, same diet, same weight. The only difference is what happens during those 8 hours of sleep that no routine checkup has ever measured. 3 times the risk. Invisible to standard care. But there is a pattern beyond non-dipping that is more dangerous still. A subset of people don't merely fail to dip. Their pressure actively climbs during sleep, rising higher at night than it ever reaches during the day. Clinically, we call these individuals reverse dippers. And the data on this group is among the most sobering I have encountered in 2 decades of cardiovascular practice. For reverse dippers, stroke risk increases by a factor of 4 to 5 times compared to normal dippers. Not a modest elevation in risk, not something that can be managed with minor lifestyle adjustments. A 4-fold increase in the probability of one of the most devastating neurological events the human body can experience. And these patients, the non-dippers, the reverse dippers, the people whose arteries are under sustained assault every single night, walk into standard office visits and receive completely normal readings. They feel well. Their numbers look reassuring. Their physicians have no reason to suspect anything. That is not a gap in patient awareness. That is a structural gap in how cardiovascular risk is assessed. A gap between what routine medicine measures and what the body is actually doing for the majority of every single day. I want you to hold that for a moment before we move forward. The test your doctor relies on captures 30 seconds of a 2-4-hour biological process. The most dangerous hours of that process occur when you are asleep, unmonitored, and entirely beyond the reach of any standard clinical measurement. For more than half of people your age, those hours tell a profoundly different story than the one on your chart. It is time to read the full story. Before we talk about solutions, I need to address something most physicians never think to ask about during a routine appointment. There are things already inside your home, on your kitchen counter, in your medicine cabinet, in your evening routine, that may be quietly and systematically driving your nighttime blood pressure higher. None of them are exotic. All of them are common, and the fact that they feel harmless is precisely what makes them dangerous. The first is licorice root. I've watched patients spend months adjusting medications, modifying diets, and overhauling sleep habits, while continuing to brew a cup of licorice root tea every evening because it felt relaxing and natural. It is natural. That's not the issue. Licorice root contains a compound called glycyrrhizin, which inhibits an enzyme in your kidneys responsible for metabolizing cortisol. When that enzyme is blocked, cortisol accumulates in your bloodstream through the night. And elevated cortisol is one of the most reliable drivers of nighttime blood pressure elevation we know of. You won't feel it. You'll simply wake up exhausted, vaguely unrested, with no clear reason why. Go to your tea cabinet tonight. Read every label carefully. Licorice root hides under multiple names: sweet root, glycyrrhiza, deglycyrrhizinated licorice, and it appears routinely inside blended herbal teas, marketed specifically for relaxation and sleep. The packaging often looks gentle and benign. The biochemical effect is not. The second hidden factor is evening alcohol. This one requires nuance, because the initial effect of alcohol is genuinely sedative. Blood pressure does dip in the first hour or two after drinking. Many people interpret that early relaxation as cardiovascular neutrality, a glass of wine with dinner. Nothing harmful. But 3 to 4 hours later, while you're in the deepest stage of sleep, your sympathetic nervous system initiates a sharp overcorrection. Cortisol surges. Adrenaline follows. Blood pressure can reach the highest point of its entire 2-4-hour cycle at precisely 3 a.m., the same window when cardiovascular events are statistically most likely to occur. The drink you had at 8 p.m. is still actively working against your cardiovascular system at 3 inches the morning, long after you've forgotten about it entirely. The third factor is grapefruit juice, specifically for anyone taking amlodipine or other calcium channel blockers. Grapefruit contains compounds that disable the liver enzyme responsible for metabolizing this class of medication. When that enzyme is suppressed, the drug doesn't clear your system on schedule. Concentration builds. What was carefully calibrated as a controlled, gradual dose becomes something unpredictable and prolonged. At night, when there is no monitoring, no awareness, and no capacity to respond to symptoms, that unpredictability carries real consequence. 3 ordinary things. 3 mechanisms most people would never connect to their cardiovascular health. Check tonight. The answer may already be on your shelf. So the critical question becomes this: how do you actually see what your cardiovascular system is doing while you sleep? The answer exists. The technology is widely available, covered by most insurance plans, and has been considered the clinical gold standard in blood pressure assessment for decades. Most people over 65 have never been offered it. It's called ABPM, ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. The device itself is straightforward: a small, lightweight cuff worn on your arm for a full 2-4-hour period while you go about your normal life. You cook, you drive, you watch television, you fall asleep. Every 30 minutes, automatically, the cuff inflates and records a reading. Day and night, waking and sleeping, active and still. What it produces is not a snapshot. It is a complete portrait, the only clinically validated method for capturing your true nighttime pressure profile, identifying non-dipping patterns, and detecting the kind of nocturnal hypertension that has been accumulating damage in your arteries for years without a single symptom to show for it. Here's what you need to understand about how this test gets ordered. It almost never happens unless you ask for it directly, by name. in explicit terms. Physicians working within the constraints of a 1 5-minute appointment default to what is routine. ABPM is not routine. It is available, it is appropriate, and for anyone over 60 with any history of blood pressure concerns, it is arguably essential. At your next appointment, say these 4 letters: A, B, P, M. That conversation starts with you. The second test is urine microalbumin. Your kidneys contain an extraordinarily dense network of microscopic blood vessels, some of the most pressure-sensitive tissue in the human body. When blood pressure remains chronically elevated overnight, those vessels sustain damage long before any standard kidney function test detects a problem. What microalbumin measures is the earliest biological whisper of that damage. Trace amounts of a protein called albumin that begins leaking into urine when the kidneys are under sustained vascular stress. This signal appears years, sometimes a decade, before kidney function visibly declines. It is a warning delivered while the window for intervention is still open. Most standard panels never include it. The third test is oxidized LDL, and this one reframes something you already know. You're familiar with LDL, the cholesterol marker on every routine blood panel, but standard panels measure total LDL. They don't measure what happens to that cholesterol when it's attacked by free radicals generated by sustained vascular inflammation. Oxidized LDL is structurally damaged cholesterol, far more aggressive in its interaction with arterial walls, far more directly implicated in plaque formation, and a precise biological marker of exactly the kind of arterial damage that chronic nighttime hypertension accelerates. 3 tests: ABPM, urine microalbumin, oxidized LDL. Write those down before this video ends. That list is your entire agenda for your next appointment, and it represents a level of cardiovascular clarity that no routine checkup has ever given you. Now let's talk about what you can actually do. And I want to start with the intervention that surprises people most. Not because it's complicated, not because it requires a new prescription or an expensive supplement, but because the answer has been hiding in plain sight inside your existing medicine cabinet. The timing of when you take your blood pressure medication. Consider what we know about how these drugs actually work. Most antihypertensives reach peak concentration in your bloodstream within 2 to 4 hours of ingestion. After that peak, potency begins a slow, steady decline. If you take your medication at 7 a.m., which is what the majority of patients do, because that's what they were told at the time of prescription, and the habit solidified from there, its protective effect has diminished considerably by the time you turn off the light at 11 p.m. The hours between midnight and 5 a.m., the precise window when your cardiovascular system is most vulnerable, when non-dipping patterns do their accumulated damage, when reverse dippers experience their most dangerous pressure. Elevations are the hours your morning medication covers least effectively. This is not a theoretical concern. It has been studied directly, rigorously, and at extraordinary scale. The Hibiscus chronotherapy trial enrolled over 19,000 patients and followed them for nearly 6 years, one of the largest and longest cardiovascular outcome studies ever conducted. Researchers divided participants into 2 groups. One group took their existing blood pressure medications in the morning, as conventional practice dictates. The other group took the identical medications at bedtime. Same drugs, same doses, same patients. The only variable was the clock. The bedtime group experienced nearly 45% lower rates of heart attack, stroke, heart failure, and cardiovascular death over the follow-up period. 45%. From timing alone. No new medications, no dosage increases, no additional interventions of any kind. Just a different moment in the day to swallow a pill most of these patients had already been taking for years. The implications of that finding are difficult to overstate, and yet medication timing is almost never discussed during a standard cardiology appointment. Now, I need to be unambiguous about something important. Do not alter your medication schedule independently based on what you've heard today. This is not a general recommendation that applies uniformly to every drug or every patient. Diuretics, in particular, should not be taken at bedtime, for reasons that are both obvious and physiologically sound. Certain other medications carry their own timing considerations. What this is, unequivocally, is a conversation worth initiating. At your next appointment, ask your physician 4 words. Could bedtime dosing help? That question takes less than 10 seconds to ask. The answer, informed by your specific medications, your specific history, your specific nighttime pressure profile, could represent the most meaningful adjustment to your cardiovascular protection in years. The prescription hasn't changed. The timing might change everything. There is one more intervention I want to discuss before we close, and I want to be precise about how I'm presenting it, because precision matters here. This is not a folk remedy. This is not wellness marketing dressed in scientific language. What I'm about to describe has been studied in randomized controlled trials, replicated across independent research groups on multiple continents, and published in peer-reviewed cardiovascular literature. The fact that it comes from a plant does not diminish its mechanism. In some ways, it makes the mechanism more remarkable. The intervention is hibiscus tea. Specifically, the dried flowers of Hibiscus sabdariffa, not a commercial teabag blend, not a flavored herbal mix, but the actual dried crimson flowers, brewed with intention and at the correct parameters. Let me tell you exactly what the science shows. Hibiscus flowers contain a dense concentration of anthocyanins, the same class of polyphenolic compounds responsible for the deep color of blueberries, pomegranates, and black cherries. You may have encountered anthocyanins discussed in the context of antioxidant protection, and that reputation is biochemically earned. These molecules actively neutralize the free radicals that oxidize LDL cholesterol and degrade the structural integrity of arterial walls, the precise damage that sustained nighttime hypertension both causes and accelerates. But hibiscus does something beyond antioxidant protection that places it in an entirely different clinical category. It inhibits ACE, the angiotensin-converting enzyme. If that phrase sounds familiar, it should. ACE inhibitors are one of the most widely prescribed classes of blood pressure medication in the world. They work by blocking the enzymatic pathway that causes blood vessels to constrict and pressure to rise. Hibiscus operates through that same pathway, not approximately, not metaphorically, through the identical pharmacological mechanism identified in laboratory assays, confirmed in human trials, and reproduced across research institutions that had no connection to one another. That is not a coincidence. That is a biological signal worth taking seriously. Multiple clinical trials measuring the effect of daily hibiscus consumption in patients with mild to moderate hypertension have documented consistent systolic reductions of 8 to 14 millimeters of mercury. In patients not currently on medication, that is a clinically significant reduction comparable in magnitude to the effect of certain first-line antihypertensive drugs at low doses. In patients already on medication, the additive effect requires careful physician oversight, which I'll address in a moment. Now, preparation is not optional. It is where most people fail entirely, and why most people who have tried hibiscus tea report no discernible benefit. A pale, lightly steeped cup of hibiscus tea is essentially flavored water. The active compounds, the anthocyanins, the ACE-inhibiting organic acids, require sufficient extraction time and proper water temperature to fully release from the dried flower material. If you are brewing hibiscus the way most people brew a standard herbal tea, you are not producing a therapeutic beverage. You are producing a pleasant-tasting liquid with minimal cardiovascular relevance. Here is the protocol the clinical literature uses, and the one I recommend. Begin with 10 grams of dried hibiscus flowers, whole dried flowers. Not tea bags, not proprietary blends where hibiscus is a secondary ingredient behind rosehip and orange peel. Heat water to approximately 90 degrees Celsius, hot enough to extract actively, not boiling, which can degrade certain polyphenolic compounds. Pour the water over the flowers and steep for a minimum of 10 to 15 minutes. Not 5, not 7. The extraction curve for hibiscus's active constituents is longer than most people allow. When properly brewed, the color should be a deep, rich burgundy, close to a full-bodied red wine in visual depth. If what you're looking at is pink or translucent, steep it considerably longer. The color is your most reliable indicator of compound concentration. 3 cups daily reflects the dose studied in clinical trials, but within that protocol, the timing of one specific cup matters most. The cup consumed 1 to 2 hours before sleep. That is the window during which hibiscus has its most direct influence on the overnight pressure trajectory, the hours we have spent this entire conversation examining. One critical point before we move on. If you are currently taking any blood pressure medication, do not introduce hibiscus into your daily routine without an explicit conversation with your physician first. The ACE inhibitor of hibiscus is real, which means its interaction with antihypertensive drugs is equally real. The combined effect can produce pressure reductions beyond what either intervention achieves independently, and in some patients, that combination requires dosage reconsideration. This is not a caution designed to discourage you. It is a reflection of the fact that Hibiscus works. Compounds with genuine pharmacological mechanisms require the same respect as the medications they biochemically resemble. Tell your doctor, bring it to the conversation. That conversation is exactly where this belongs. We've covered a significant amount of ground today. Let me bring it down to something concrete, not a summary to file away and forget, but a precise sequence of actions you can begin before this day is over. 3 steps. Tonight, the first happens in your kitchen. Go to wherever you keep your evening teas and read every label with genuine attention. You are looking for licorice root, an ingredient that appears under multiple names including glycyrrhiza, sweet root, and deglycyrrhizated licorice, and one that hides routinely inside blended herbal formulas marketed for calm and sleep. If you find it in anything you drink after 6 p.m., that product leaves your evening rotation tonight. Move it to the morning shelf, or remove it from the house entirely. This is not a minor adjustment. For some people, this single change produces a measurable shift in overnight pressure within days. The second step requires honesty, not judgment. Examine your relationship with evening alcohol with clear eyes. Not harshly, simply accurately. If a drink with dinner has become a drink close to bedtime, understand what the physiology shows. That rebound sympathetic surge at 3 a.m. is not occasional. It is not unpredictable. It occurs reliably, every single time. Whether you feel it or not, you don't need to eliminate anything tonight. But shifting that glass earlier with dinner rather than after removes one of the most consistent and correctable drivers of nocturnal hypertension most people over 60 are currently experiencing without any awareness that it's happening. The third step takes 60 seconds. Take out a piece of paper, actual paper, not a note on your phone, that will disappear into a folder and write down 3 things. ABPM, urine microalbumin, oxidized LDL. Fold that paper and place it directly inside your wallet, next to your insurance card, where it will surface naturally at your next appointment. Those 3 tests represent a level of cardiovascular visibility that no routine checkup has ever offered you. They are affordable, they are widely available, and not one of them will be ordered unless you put that list on the table and ask for them by name. That piece of paper is not a reminder. It is a clinical agenda. Treat it accordingly. Now let me tell you why I spent an entire video on this single, specific subject. I am Dr. Alex Thompson, and in over 2 decades of cardiovascular medicine, I have stood at bedsides after strokes and major cardiac events more times than I am able to count. I have had the conversations with families that no physician wants to have and no family is ever prepared for. And what I carry from those moments, what stays with me long after the clinical details have faded, is the recurring recognition of how many of those outcomes were not inevitable. The warning signals were present. They existed in nighttime pressure data that was never collected, in microalbumin levels rising quietly for years across routine labs that never included the test, in arterial stiffness accumulating steadily in the background of appointments that looked, by every available measure, completely unremarkable. In a significant number of those cases, one additional test would have changed the conversation. One informed question at one appointment, asked at the right moment, would have opened a door that remained closed until it was too late to matter. Medicine is a humbling discipline. Not every outcome is preventable, but far more are preventable than most people are ever led to believe, and the difference, more often than I can quantify, comes down to information. To patients who arrived prepared, to questions that were asked before a threshold was crossed rather than after. You are not being demanding when you ask about nighttime blood pressure. You are not being difficult when you request an ABPM. You are not overstepping when you bring a written list to your appointment and work through it methodically. You are being a precise, informed, and engaged participant in your own healthcare, and that posture, consistently and without exaggeration, produces better outcomes. The data on this is unambiguous. Let me leave you with the complete picture. Stated plainly, your daytime blood pressure reading is one frame from a continuous film. Nighttime pressure carries equal and often greater cardiovascular significance. More than half of adults over 65 are non-dippers, carrying 3 times the mortality risk of people with identical office readings, almost entirely undetected by standard care. There are correctable factors in your home making this worse. There are 3 specific tests that reveal what routine appointments cannot see. Bedtime medication timing. supported by nearly 20,000 patients in the Hibiscus trial, can reduce cardiovascular events by nearly half for appropriate candidates. And 10 grams of properly brewed hibiscus tea, taken 1 hour before sleep, carries genuine clinical evidence as a daily supporting measure. Check your tea cabinet. Write down those 3 tests. Ask about evening dosing. That is the entire protocol. Those 3 actions, initiated tonight, represent the most targeted cardiovascular investment you can make before your next appointment. If this conversation gave you something of value, share it with someone over 60 who deserves to have it: a spouse, a sibling, a close friend. This is precisely the kind of information that gets lost between referrals and follow-ups. Your share may be the reason someone asks the right question at the right time. Everything I've shared today reflects current research and my clinical experience, but it is educational in nature, not personal